It's not very often that we have somebody like you with us, Mr. Nandu Nankishore. A very warm welcome on Guilt Free. You are the Executive Director on the board of Nestle Worldwide. You're handling 120 countries, if not more, in Asia, Africa and Australia. You not only have nutrition in your DNA, but you enjoy studying about it. You like knowing the science behind it. You read Michael Pollan, I know, and one of the things that he writes is that when you go into a supermarket, try and imagine your great-grandmother behind the cart and then pick things up accordingly that she would have approved of. Do you buy that theory?
We hesitate to classify foods as good foods and bad foods. It's easy to say that 100 years ago there were no chocolates around, so therefore don't eat chocolates, or don't eat ice cream because there was no ice cream 100 years ago. And yet responsible pleasure can be part of a balanced lifestyle.
That's interesting. Responsible pleasure. That's right. But then the onus you're saying for that pleasure is on the consumer.
Well, it's on society, it's on consumer, and it's all about creating awareness. The world is facing a double burden of disease. On the one hand, you have across the world 1 billion people who are undernourished, who are malnourished. And you have 1 billion people who are overweight or obese, and the numbers may even be larger. And often it's the same societies which suffer this double burden of disease. It's the same societies across subtropical parts of the world where you have the highest rates of malnutrition and therefore stunting under the age of 5, infant mortality, etc. And in the same populations you often have the fastest growing rates of diabetes or obesity. So this issue is something that is a societal issue. It's something that's multifactorial. There is increasingly a tendency in society to look to apportion responsibility and blame to companies or to individuals or to other bodies. And I think we all have to work together to find solutions.
So Nestle is being looked upon very clearly now, and you're advertising it as a health, wellness and nutrition company. And from what I know, that you're putting in billions of dollars of research is going into ensuring that the products are redesigned to making them healthier for the consumer. The question here is that when you're making something healthy, chances are that the cost of producing the product increases.
Yes.
Trans fats are cheaper than healthier forms of fat. Therefore, who's actually taking on the burden of that cost? Will the company do it, or do you pass on the burden to the consumer?
Yeah, there are two challenges. Cost is one, taste is the other challenge. What we see is when you take out salt or sugar or trans fats from any product, it gets less tasty. And people fundamentally guide their eating habits through taste. So you can put a very healthy product in front of somebody. If it doesn't taste good, she won't eat it, he won't eat it, irrespective of the age. So the real challenge for us is to eliminate or reduce the products that are, the ingredients that are at risk, sodium for instance, or eliminate trans fatty acids or sugar, and try and put more of the good stuff in, have more whole grains in there, have good balance of fats in there, omega-3, omega-6, etc. So as you do this, the big challenge is how do you keep it tasty, how do you manage the cost? Both parts. Here Nestle is the biggest investor in research in the area of food and nutrition. We spend more than $1 billion a year on nutrition research. We probably have the highest body of knowledge on basic understanding of food science, nutrition and products as a result of this. We have over the last decade, we have eliminated 30,000 tons of salt. We've taken out 30% of sugar from our products. We've almost eliminated trans fatty acids. So there's a lot of good work that has happened. So the challenge, as I said, is that's where the research comes in.
But do you think the Indian consumer is ready or aware that they have to cut down on this terrible trio of salt, sugar, fat, and therefore they should be consuming healthier things? Or is it okay to just say healthy soups and you feel that people will not read between the lines? And
there's a lot of misinformation and lack of awareness in India today. And the misinformation and lack of awareness then leads to some people seeking to categorize foods as good foods or bad foods. We will be out there educating people about what is healthy nutrition, and we will be out there proactively reducing in our products the level of sodium, or eliminating trans fats, reducing SFAs and reducing sugar.
Well, today is one of those days you can give yourself a pat on the back, because there's news hot off the press that 16 global food giants have decreased up to 6.4 trillion calories in the last 5 years, I think, which is not a bad deal.
And Nestle is leading the pack there.
At the end of the day, I would say that you're still consuming a packet of soup vis-a-vis, say, something that's growing from the ground. It's still coming from a plant as opposed to a plant, you know, the literal plant from the earth. And so therefore, there is this change that is taking place in the world. There were some astounding statistics last time that we've met that you'd spoken about. People moving in, populations moving in from rural areas to cities, and therefore the need for packaged foods and processed foods. Having said that, would you still say that consuming food from a plant, from Mother Nature and from earth, which is what in India we've done all along, is it such a great thing that we're going to be moving towards the packaged food industry and the processed food industry?
Well, the objective is to have as fresh food as possible with as little preservatives. Yeah, that's the objective. The trend that you mentioned earlier is today, for the first time in the history of mankind, 50% of mankind lives in cities. As you move to urban areas, you need access to food. And having access to fresh food is not as easy anymore. Urban lifestyles and work time, travel pressure, time pressure, work pressure also demand, therefore, processed food options to help people cope with this lifestyle. And here's where the responsibility of companies like us is to provide options for people that are as healthy, yeah, as what they would normally have.
As close to being, right,
what they would have normally had otherwise. And in fact, in some ways are even better. Because if you take, the moment we take a processed food, yeah, and we take fresh ingredients and we, let's say, make the soup, and we capture the freshness and make the soup available. Yeah. The first thing we do when we select our ingredients is we screen the ingredients for pesticide content, for heavy metal contamination, for antibiotic contamination, and for bacteriological contamination. So really what you're getting is already something that's thoroughly screened. Yeah, and if you prepare fresh, now it's a little bit of a lottery. If you buy from a farm where it's been grown properly, you get great products. If you buy from a farm where it has not been grown properly, or they've used DDT in the fields, then chances are you will consume DDT in the product. So as a responsible manufacturer, what we'd like to think is we give a certain guarantee of quality and consistency.
Now, with climate change and with other things that are getting more and more unpredictable, food is becoming a volatile commodity. There's a lot of talk about sustainability. Again, in India we are very far from it. Most people who go to a restaurant feel that if the rack of lamb is from New Zealand, it's better. Do you think companies like yours should have a responsibility towards making sure that in the long run, looking ahead in the next 20 years, there is an equitable distribution of food, and that we don't sort of end up, you know, ruining our planet just to ensure that everybody is fed?
Yeah, there are two parts of this. There's food security and there's nutrient security, and they're not necessarily the same thing, although they're linked. What we know is today global population is 7 billion. It's going to go to about 9.5 billion by 2050. So therefore we need at least a 50% increase in food production. What we also know is that as populations get more affluent, they all want to consume more animal protein. Yeah? And so fundamentally, to create more animal protein, we need not a 50% increase in food, we need a doubling of food production between now and 2050. So what do you need for food production? You need land, you need water, and you need sunlight. The sunlight, thankfully, there's plenty. Land is actually reducing, because with urbanization and transforming a fertile land for other purposes, there is a pressure on land, and the biggest pressure is in fact on water and water availability. Today, as mankind, 70% of the water that we use is used for agriculture, for food production. And if we have to double food production, we are already using today water, fresh water, at rates higher than replenishment levels. So in fact, the risk is in the next 30 years the world will run out of water before it runs out of energy. So the challenge before us is how do you produce food most efficiently given the water resources available and the fertile land available. 50% of the protein we consume, animal protein we consume, comes from dairy. Now, milk, India is the world's largest milk producer. So we know milk, it's part of our culture, we love it. But the average productivity of milk, so an average cow in India probably gives 1,000 liters of milk per year, whereas if you go to New Zealand, you probably have 10 times that, tenfold difference in productivity. Why is that? It has to do with the genetic stock of the cow, it has to do with the kind of fodder, it has to do with the amount of water the cow consumes, and it has to do with the conditions in which the cow is housed and the temperature in which the cow exists. So if the world needs this amount of animal protein, then we are going to have to find a way to ship animal protein around the world from places where it is most economically grown with the least water and with the maximum output, which necessarily means temperate zones, whether it's New Zealand or Chile or Mongolia. Having said that, what you are looking at is more energy, which is a challenge that comes after first making sure food is available. And for energy, absolutely, we should try to, as far as possible, increase productivity and sourcing within your given area, local environment.
But when you say that food will have to be transferred from surplus zones to deficient zones, you're saying that then food miles will increase, the cost of food will go up. I'm imagining.
It's going up today. Today you see agricultural prices in general are on a long-term uptrend. Dairy prices today are at some of the highest levels they have ever been. And this is simply because of the demand for animal protein and the mismatch with supply. And the fact that surplus supply, is only coming out of a few manufacturing locations.
So we're chatting about health, wellness and nutrition with Mr. Nandu Nandkishore of Nestle and how to lead a guilt-free life. I think that's pretty much my mantra at least. I know it's very closely associated with what you are passionate about. In India, food labeling at the best of times is dodgy. Your FSAI guidelines are not very clear. There's a huge grey area between what is printed on the label and what the fine print says. Just recently I happened to pick up this, we were doing a taste test of chips and it said olive oil in big font on the packet of chips, and they're touting themselves as olive oil chips. And then when you look at the fine print at the back where the nutrition label is given per serving, it said trans fats, vegetable oils and other fats. Do you think that time has come where at least companies themselves by and large should be responsible in ensuring that they do not mislead the consumer by just making these tall claims? It's not so much about the fine print. The fine print, I'm sure they're all following guidelines. It's more the tall claims, healthier for you, super for you, more natural for you. How does one get beyond this?
I fully agree, Seema. Nestle has been in existence for 147 years now. And the only way you can be in existence for so long is if you build trust. The ultimate objective of everything we do is to build trust in Nestle. Okay? Everything we do. The moment you lose that trust, you cannot survive anymore. So it's been taken 147 years of responsible behavior, not only offering good quality products, but how you communicate your products, what you say on the label, how you treat your employees, how you behave towards society, paying taxes. All that is part of responsible behavior that helps you to earn trust. Now, we have seen around the world over this last 147 years, and in my career over the last 25-30 years, companies who come make tall claims and they often have short-term wins, but sooner or later they don't survive, because the moment consumers discover or find out that they have been lied to, they are very quick to make a choice where they lose trust in that company. So yes, companies absolutely have a responsibility for communicating truthfully, honestly, and this is the only way you can build trust. So if you say olive oil, you better have olive oil. If you have other oils, then don't say olive oil.
That's the thing. You see, it's a grey area. I'm sure the chips have olive oil. It's the whole thing of not giving the complete picture.
You have to give the complete picture.
That's the thing.
Absolutely right. I was in the market the other day and I saw a communication for a chips that said 85% fat-free. You think about that, and does that mean it's 15% fat? And suddenly you think about it very differently. So communication has to be responsible.
Well, in India we, I think, have a bigger challenge, which is that people are not even aware as to how to decipher the label. So for example, if the label is saying the whole idea of looking at per serving, per 100 grams, again this is a dodgy area, because I've seen that normally a label should say per 100 grams, sometimes you'll find it will be per 250 grams, and when you start doing the math, you realize, but how many of us in the country are actually going to sit and make that distinction?
Yeah, I think there are two parts to what you're saying. One, we do need some regulatory guidelines on how to create labels, on what to say, and therefore to approve claims. In many countries we have the regulators approve all labels, so nobody can put a label out there without pre-vetting the claim. So you need some strict regulatory guidelines on what to say and how to say. And the second thing we need education for the consumers in how to read labels. So we can't do much about the first, but on the second, and how to read labels is something we can do something about. And it's something I'll take now on board with the Nestle India team to ask them to think about how do we build in a strong education for consumers to check and read and understand labels.
And that will probably hold you in the long run in good stead.
It will hold us in good stead. It would be good investment to do that.
The one thing that you spoke about again some months ago, and it's struck a chord. Today we've spoken about food and geography and food and economy. There's a large part of food that is to do with culture. And I remember you saying this, that in India, women especially are somehow lose out on nutrition because they're often in a family the last to eat. Would Nestle do something to change this?
Thank you, Seema, for asking this question, because it's very close to my heart and it's very close to our mission in Nestle. Now, we know that rising rates of diabetes, cardiovascular disease, obesity are multifactorial. But one of the root causes appears to be linked to malnutrition during early childhood and pregnancy. There is more and more evidence that indicates that the first 1,000 days of life, from pregnancy through to about 2 years of age, you're actually setting a blueprint for health throughout life. If a mother is highly stressed or malnourished during pregnancy, the chances are that the fetus then starts to make epigenetic changes to be able to survive and in a world of starvation that it expects, or highly stressed world that it expects to encounter, right? So therefore the baby is born smaller and is therefore low birth weight and grows up to be stunted, and so it requires less calories, reaches sexual maturity faster, etc., to survive and procreate so that the species survives. This is kind of an epigenetic survival mechanism. Having been born, then if the baby encounters a world where there is surplus of calories, then very quickly the response, the metabolic response, often 20, 30, 40 years later, tends to be diabetes or cardiovascular disease and or obesity. So if you take, for instance, one of the best predictors for diabetes in adult men is the waist-hip ratio, how much of a paunch you have. Yeah. Now for the same waist-hip ratio, ideally it should be less than 1. Right? You should not have a paunch. For the same waist-hip ratio, I forget the exact numbers, but it's something like this. Let's say the ratio is 1.1 to 1, you have a 10% paunch. Yeah, then in Europe, something like 10% of the population is diabetic. In India, Pakistan, and subtropical parts of the world, something like 30% of the population is diabetic. Why is that? We don't really know. We suspect it has a lot to do with malnutrition faced by this metabolism during the first 1,000 days, which then leads to a different way to process calories and also to higher fat deposits inside in the organs that are not visible externally, because that's what enables the organism to survive in times of starvation.
So you're saying these lifestyle diseases are not genetically...
They're multifactorial. They're multifactorial. But this, we start to understand, is one reason why this happens. And we see across India, 30 to 40% of children below the age of 5 are stunted, underweight, underheight, and underdeveloped, therefore. And one of the causes appears to be that, in fact, women are the last to eat. Now, there is a logic and a cultural background. First she feeds the in-laws, then she feeds the children, then she feeds the husband, and she eats what is left. So whatever the cultural reasons these are, and there are probably good reasons why it evolved for the way it evolved, but the net impact is that you are compromising the health of an entire future generation. So a very simple thing that we can do as a society, and it's not easy, that I'd like to see, is to change the nutritional status of women from being the last to eat to being the first to eat. Just as we say, educate a girl and you educate a family, in the same way, if the girl eats first, even before she is pregnant, you prepare her nutritionally, then you are actually preparing the health of a future generation. Not 2 years from now, not 3 years from now, but 40 years from now. This is one simple act that can probably have the maximum impact in public health.
It's a mindset change that has to take place, which will take a while. It's a long-term goal. What could the company do through its advertisements, through its subtle, I would say, ways of, because if you try and tell somebody, let the woman eat first, most Indian men, pardon me for saying this, but yeah, will turn around and say, go get a life. But how do you make that change come about slowly in the...
Well, Seema, talking to you now is part of this, getting the word out.
I think the work that you're doing is tremendous, and the fact that you're not just doing it because it needs to be done, but I think because you believe in it. That's what makes it very special. Mr. Nandkishore, thank you very much.
Thank you, Seema. It's a pleasure.
Pleasure.